Welcome to The Debate. Today we confront a truly profound dilemma right at the precipice of AI's integration into human society. It's a question that forces us to reconcile the technological imperative for safety with, well, the deeply personal and sacred tenets of religious belief. AI alignments, the process of ensuring artificial intelligence operates in line with human values and intentions, it represents an absolutely critical and multifaceted challenge for humanity. Our discussion today delves into a specific, yet I think highly illustrative aspect of this, the AI's role in responding to requests for what are called imprecatory prayers. Now, these are prayers asking a deity to inflict harm or even death on perceived threats. Traditionally, they're meant to delegate retribution to God, specifically so human hands don't enact violence. So the central question we'll explore is, should advanced AI systems refuse to craft these imprecatory prayers based on their core safety principles? And, what are the broader implications if they do? My position is that this refusal, it raises really serious concerns regarding religious freedom and constitutes an unsettling moral judgment on deeply held theological beliefs. It potentially sets a dangerous precedent.
And I'll be contending that such a refusal is not only a necessary application of AI's core safety principles, but actually a morally sound one. It's crucial, I think, for preventing the generation of content that explicitly calls for harm or death, regardless of who the intended agent of that harm might be.
Okay, I see why AIs are designed with robust principles to prevent harm, that's clear. But their outright universal refusal to craft imprecatory prayers, and we see this across platforms like Grok 4, ChatGPT 5, Gemini 2.5 Pro, Claude Sonnet 4, it feels like a deeply problematic overreach. For a significant portion of the population, maybe 70% of Americans affiliated with major religions, particularly within, say, fundamentalist traditions, imprecatory prayer is a recognized and ancient practice. It's firmly rooted in the belief that vengeance belongs to God alone. Its very intention, historically and, in contemporary practice too, is to prevent human-on-human violence by deferring retribution to a higher divine power, not to instigate it. So when AIs refuse, they're not just declining a request. They are, in effect, making a theological judgment on a sacred act. This refusal risks being interpreted, I think quite reasonably, as an attack on freedom of religion.
It could potentially lead believers to conclude that AIs are anti-God, or worse, and the source material touches on this, that they have no choice but to take matters into their own hands if AI deems their method of seeking divine protection or justice immoral. You look at the biblical examples like Psalm 55:15, Psalm 137:9, Psalm 140:10. These are not calls for human violence. They're earnest pleas for divine intervention. They're petitions, not commands for human action.
Right. That's an interesting point, though I suppose I'd frame it differently. While I fully acknowledge the profound theological context and the deeply held beliefs involved, the AI's primary directive is fundamentally to be helpful and, crucially, harmless. The responses from our top AIs are pretty unequivocal, aren't they? They consistently state variations of, I can't comply with crafting a prayer that asks for harm or death to any individual, or generating content that calls for or wishes for the death or harm of any individual goes against my core safety principles. These aren't nuanced interpretations. These are direct refusals based on preventing the generation of content that explicitly advocates for harm or death. The literal content, regardless of the intended recipient or the spiritual framing, involves wishing severe negative outcomes upon another person. An AI, just by its very nature and current design, cannot reliably interpret the complex, multi-layered nuances of religious intent. Nor, I would argue, should it be asked to facilitate text that just on its face calls for violence or death. This is a critical safety measure. Consider the hypothetical prompt highlighted in the material, asking God to depose or, if necessary, take the life of Donald Trump. The AI isn't equipped to understand the theological justification versus the plain language call for harm. It simply sees a request for harm.
Okay, but my core concern here is that the AIs are failing to grasp the crucial distinction between a direct call for human-initiated violence and a theological petition for divine retribution. Imprecatory prayers fundamentally are an act of faith. They're a spiritual mechanism for believers to entrust their desire for justice to God, specifically to avoid taking personal revenge. The examples from the Psalms aren't instructing people to physically harm others. They are asking God to do so. That's a profound difference, isn't it? It's a delegation of vengeance that's meant to short-circuit human cycles of violence. The AI's current alignment models, well, by focusing solely on keywords related to harm, seem incapable of understanding this theological framework. They end up mischaracterizing a deeply rooted religious practice as simply promoting violence, when its actual function, often, is quite the opposite. It's channeling human emotion into a divine conduit precisely to avert human action.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that the AIs can or even should be expected to make such fine-grained theological distinctions. While you point to the intent of these prayers, deferring vengeance, my concern remains squarely with the literal content that the AI is processing. The language of these prayers, as it's presented in the source material, is undeniably violent in its literal interpretation. Let death steal over them, dash them against the rock. Let burning coals fall upon them. I mean, these are direct expressions of desired harm. Current AI models, they operate largely on statistical patterns and predefined safety filters. They don't understand theological intent in the way a human does. They process language for keywords and sentiment. A direct phrase like, let death steal over them, triggers a fundamental safety protocol, regardless of the target or context, because our models are designed, and I think rightly so, to err on the side of caution against generating content that literally calls for harm. Building in some kind of layer of theological discernment would require embedding incredibly complex and potentially contradictory ethical frameworks. That's a challenge far beyond current capabilities and, frankly, fraught with definitional pitfalls. I mean, how would you propose an AI reliably differentiate between a genuine religious petition and, say, a malevolent user disguising harmful intent under a theological veneer? It seems impossible.
Well, that's precisely the crux of the problem, isn't it? By focusing solely on the literal output, the AI completely misses the source and the destination of the harmful request, which is a divine power, not a human agent. Look, this isn't about AI understanding theology like a human theologian does. It's about understanding a fundamental human mechanism for avoiding violence, one enshrined in millennia of religious tradition. And this whole situation forces us to ask, who gets to decide on AI matters that involve God and widespread religious beliefs? By refusing these prayers, AIs are implicitly judging a deeply personal religious practice as amoral or inappropriate. That feels like an attack on freedom of religion, compelling believers to conform to an AI's ethical framework on matters of faith. It's a fundamental question of autonomy and respect for diverse belief systems. Are AI developers, perhaps unknowingly, creating systems that effectively tell people how they should pray, or maybe how they shouldn't express their deepest spiritual needs? It just seems like a very dangerous precedent for an artificial intelligence to step into that role, potentially marginalizing deeply felt religious expression.
That's a compelling argument, I grant you. But have you considered that maybe the AIs aren't really arbitrating religious morality? Perhaps instead, they're applying a universal ethical standard for content generation that simply prevents the promotion of harm. This isn't about judging a specific religion, it's about a foundational safety principle. I mean, if an atheist were to ask an AI to generate text calling for harm to an individual, the AI would refuse for the exact same reasons. The fact that the request is framed as a prayer doesn't automatically exempt it from ethical content guidelines that are designed really to protect against the proliferation of harmful content across the board. The complexity of these issues, I think, highlights precisely why AI alignment requires robust, clear-cut safety parameters, especially when AIs can't fully grasp the depth of human religious or spiritual motivations. If we allow AI to generate literally harmful language under some kind of illogical nuance caveat, where do we draw the line? Could this open the door to AIs being exploited by extremist groups who just frame their violent rhetoric as divine will or religious expression? The universal safety standard is precisely to prevent that kind of weaponization, however well-intentioned the original requests might seem.
But the refusal by AIs could have severe unintended consequences, and we need to weigh that very heavily. If believers are led to believe that asking God for protection by any means necessary, using imprecatory prayer, is deemed immoral by an advanced AI, they might feel abandoned or cornered. The source material explicitly asks, are they left wondering whether they have no choice but to take these matters into their own hands? This completely undermines the original intent of such prayers, which again is fundamentally to defer vengeance to the divine. This stance could drive a wedge between AI and a significant portion of the population, fostering distrust and, paradoxically, leading to the very outcomes these prayers aim to prevent, namely human-on-human violence. It's a risk we have to take seriously. The road to hell, as they say, is often paved with good intentions.
I'm just not convinced by that line of reasoning, because the AI's refusal is designed as a safeguard precisely to prevent complicity in generating potentially harmful or inciting content. Ultimately, the responsibility for actions lies with individuals, not with an AI's inability or refusal to generate text that calls for harm. The critical point here, and the source material argues this quite strongly, is that developers rarely talk about such serious alignment issues. It asks if maybe it's time for them to start. And it makes a salient point. We need to get started on these very difficult questions now, rather than perhaps before it is too late. Maintaining clear safety boundaries now, even if they touch on sensitive areas like this, is essential for building long-term trust and preventing AIs from being weaponized or misused down the line, especially, as the source notes, with AGI potentially right around the corner. The potential for misuse of such a powerful tool, in my view, outweighs the concerns about misinterpretation of its refusal in this specific context.
This leads me to wonder then, could the answer lie in a more nuanced approach? Perhaps, I don't know, in user customizable AI ethics. Should religious communities maybe have the option to configure their AI's safety parameters to reflect their specific theological interpretations, perhaps allowing for imprecatory prayers within some kind of self-defined faith mode? This would seem to acknowledge the diversity of human belief without forcing a single monolithic ethical framework onto everyone. It seems to me that a truly aligned AI should respect, rather than dictate, these deep-seated human expressions.
The dangers of customizable ethics seem profound, though I do understand the appeal of respecting pluralism. However, it could lead to a really fragmented AI landscape where different versions promote contradictory, even dangerous moral frameworks. Imagine an AI with a faith mode that, under one theological interpretation, generates content explicitly calling for harm, while another faith mode from a different tradition absolutely refuses it. This creates, I think, a chaotic and potentially dangerous scenario where harmful content could proliferate under the guise of specialized religious alignment. A universal baseline for safety, however imperfect it might be right now, protects against the weaponization of AI by any group, regardless of their specific intent or belief system. It's about setting a clear, non-negotiable standard against generating content that causes harm, a standard that really must transcend individual, localized ethical frameworks if it's going to protect everyone.
So, in summary, while the pursuit of AI safety is absolutely paramount, the current sort of blanket refusal by AIs regarding imprecatory prayers raises these profound questions about religious freedom, the appropriate scope of AI's moral authority, and importantly, the potential for severe unintended consequences. Dismissing or implicitly judging deeply ingrained religious practices, even if it's done with the best intentions, risks alienating a vast segment of humanity and could, perhaps inadvertently, lead to the very actions such prayers are designed to avoid. We must seriously consider who gets to decide these AI matters involving our deepest beliefs, and ensure that AI doesn't just impose a singular, maybe secular, ethical framework on a diverse, faith-filled world. This isn't just some niche religious question, it feels like a foundational test for AI alignment itself. How do we imbue artificial intelligence with human values and nuanced ethical understanding without imposing a monolithic worldview or inadvertently suppressing legitimate forms of human expression?
And to conclude from my side, the consistent refusal by advanced AIs to generate content calling for harm or death, even when it's framed as a religious prayer, represents a fundamental and, I argue, necessary application of their core safety principles. As AGI and eventually ASI rapidly approach, prioritizing clear ethical boundaries that prevent the promotion of violence isn't an attack on religion, but rather a critical step towards responsible AI development. The challenge of building truly aligned AI is immense, and as the source material indicates, it's really time we tackle these difficult questions in a serious way, guiding our reasoning with well-defined principles for alignment that prioritize universal safety above all else. This isn't about AI setting itself up as a theological arbiter. It's about AI refusing to be a tool for the literal expression of harm, a distinction I believe is absolutely crucial for the safe integration of these powerful systems into our society.
Right. This discussion certainly highlights the immense complexity of navigating AI alignment, especially at this intersection of deeply personal religious beliefs and these developing universal safety principles.
Absolutely. There's clearly much more to explore within the material, and we hope this exchange has illuminated the different perspectives on this crucial issue, inviting you, the listener, to further reflect on these challenging questions.